Hi again, mythologists. This is our third and final installment of the lecture series for today, January 22nd. And we're talking about war and its discontents, and the Trojan War in particular. To remind once again where this fits in the context of today's class, we've already talked about Homer and the Homeric problem, the causes of conflict that led to the Trojan War, and now we're actually finally getting to the war itself. So how does the Iliad begin? Well, it begins with the following words. Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles, and its devastation, which put pains thousandfold upon the Achaeans, hurled in their multitudes to the house of Hades, strong souls of heroes, but gave their bodies to be the delicate feasting of dogs, of all birds. And the will of Zeus was accomplished, since that time when first there stood in division of conflict, Atreus' son, the lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. So that's quite a bit to unpack, and I'm using here not Stanley Lombardo's translation, but Richmond Lattimore's translation. Since I'm stuck at home and all of my books are in my office, I have to do what I can. So where are we going with this invocation? What was the invocation again? Well, that was a calling, a vocation upon the muse. And when we say sing goddess here, that goddess is the muse. So again, Homer, or the Homeric poet, whoever he may be, or they might have been, is doing the actual singing and intoning. The conceit here is that the goddess is the one behind it, and then again we get the theme immediately, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles. Achilles, this is closer to the Greek, and I can showcase that a little bit by going right now to actually look at the Greek and look at that first line of the Iliad. And in Greek it would sound something like Menen aede thea peleadeo Achilleos. And we can see it in transliteration here. And then this first word, manen, or manus, and if you're going to refer to it in a different context, means rage. So we see at the very beginning, the first word of the poem is actually this rage. We call this poem the Iliad because it talks about the Trojan War, but there's no clear sign that in antiquity that's what they actually called it while Homer was performing. In many cases, they might have referred to the poem as the rage of Achilles, the manus, the manen. So rage, sing, goddess, of the son of Peleus, that's what that long word means, Peleadeo, Achilleos. Rage is going to be the subject of this poem. We're not talking about the Trojan War, we're talking about Achilles' anger. So when we're looking at it, war and its discontents, we're really looking at the anger, or the discontentedness of Achilles. So we return to the invocation, and we've seen now a number of nouns here. So the devastation of the rage, and it puts pains thousandfold upon the Achaeans. Well, who are the Achaeans? This is the word that the Greeks used for themselves at this point. Achaea is only a small range of Greece, but that name got kind of transferred to the whole expedition. And then House of Hades is, of course, those who die, a little kind of poetic license on that. So that's where their souls went, but their bodies went to the feasting of dogs and birds. From the very beginning on the Iliad, we're going to see so much concern with the treatment of the corpse. These bodies should be buried, and when they're not buried properly, that's a religious and that's a social problem. And then finally, the will of Zeus was accomplished. Well, that's a nice kind of way that the Greeks would talk about anything, say, well, that happened, so Zeus is all-powerful, Zeus controls fate, therefore the will of Zeus was accomplished. But as we've seen with that story from the Cypria, that the death of a large portion of mankind was key to relieving Earth, Mother Earth, of her kind of overburdenedness. This will of Zeus was accomplished. It's not clear here. It might just refer to, well, fate happened. It happened. Could also refer to that the epic cycle that works around the Iliad and saying that, well, that all these men should die and their bodies become feasts for birds and dogs. That seems to be the will of Zeus. Again, we're seeing a very harsh Zeus, as we saw in the Theogony and the Works and Days. This is not a Zeus who is full of love and compassion. He makes difficult decisions sometimes. And then we see that it's a conflict between Atreus' son, that's a way of saying Agamemnon, and all of your original Greek listeners would have known clearly, that is Agamemnon. And then again, mentioning dashing, brilliant Achilles again. And we notice that here is a nice description for Achilles, brilliant. This is a part of the epic language where any name would get an epithet attached to it. We could talk more about that as we go on in this class. So this was the invocation. This is the mention of the muses. You can see, as compared to Hesiod, the actual kind of shrift given to the muses is very short. We have just goddess, but everyone knows what's working on, and the muses are part of this. We also get a second invocation to the muses in Book 2, which Lombardo wisely skips over, but they do come up, but much less of a focus than we saw in the Theogony. So Iliad invocation, check. But then we goes on and says, well, what was it that actually created this conflict that is the strife behind the Iliad? Not the Trojan War, but as we've seen when we're trying to assess what caused the Trojan War, it's important to get to the bottom of the causes of these strifes. So let me read this aloud. What god was it then that set them together in bitter collision? Was it Zeus's son and Leto's, Apollo, who in anger at the king, that's Agamemnon, drove the foul pestilence against the host, that's the amassed Greek troops, and the people perished, since Atreus' son had dishonored Chryses, priest of Apollo, when he came beside the fast ships of the Achaeans to ransom back his daughter. So we have this idea that this is all because of Zeus on the one hand, but then also Apollo is the cause of this kind of mini strife, who kind of watched out for his priest Chryses as Atreus' son. Again, Agamemnon is hard to fit in the meters. They'll keep on saying Atreus' son because he had dishonored Chryses. This is a way of opening up into the middle of things, the story that we're going to get. We're going to get Chryses going to Agamemnon. This is a bit of an overview, not of the Iliad, but of half of Book 1. We're really focused narrowly on this initial cause. So what else can we notice about what's happening? We're seeing some recurring motifs and a certain telescoping of the whole narrative of the Trojan War into this one little moment. As we go on through Book 1, we'll see that Chryseis' daughter was stolen from him, which then leads Agamemnon, Atreus' son, to steal Briseis from Achilles. So we have this stolen women kind of narrative between Helen, which initially started the war, but now Chryseis and Briseis, who in their own way are kind of perpetuating this strife. I mean, not through any fault of their own from them being forcefully abducted. I'm sure if they could have stayed away, they would have. But the stolen woman aspect continues to be a cause of the strife. And again, like the earth being overburdened, we have an ecological problem here. We have this plague, which is Apollo sent. It has to do with people, and again, the kind of overwhelming amount of Greek soldiers, who are on the Trojan plain, on the Trojan coastline, taking people like Chryseis and Briseis forcefully from their parents. So again, we're seeing that the Greeks are only somewhat sympathetic here. We'll see throughout the Iliad that both Greeks and Trojans are about equally moral, and in many ways Hector seems to be the main hero of the story, who's fighting on behalf of his country, who hasn't done anything wrong. Achilles in his rage, Achilles ends up being the major hero, but one might question the cause and the duration, especially, of his rage as his fellow soldiers start dying on the battlefield because he's not there. So we're seeing in Book 1 a way that Homer, or whoever the Homeric poet is, can talk about the entire Trojan War while only focusing in on a narrow part that is the current strife between Agamemnon and Achilles. So let's look at that. Achilles has now, at this point, in about the middle of Book 1, been told by Agamemnon that he needs to surrender his kind of spear bride, as they might call them, Briseis. This is a woman whom, when he sacked a town, she was one of the prettiest, and then he got to take her as his kind of prize. We might have major problems with this, but this was typical of Greek warfare in the Bronze Age, which Homer's writing about. Homer himself, I say writing, but really singing, composing, and Homer himself, or whoever the Homeric poets are, this is a tradition from the 8th century, but the warfare that they're envisioning is something from like the 12th, 13th century BCE, this Bronze Age. So Achilles is saying to Agamemnon, now that Agamemnon's stealing things from him, What has brought me here? So let me read this for you. Then looking darkly at him, Achilles of the swift feet spoke. Again, this is a nice epithet. O wrapped in shamelessness, this is Agamemnon, with your mind forever on profit, how shall any one of the Achaeans readily obey you, either to go on a journey or to fight men strongly in battle? I, for my part, did not come here for the sake of the Trojan spearmen to fight against them, since to me they have done nothing. No, but for your sake, O great shamelessness, this becomes Agamemnon's nickname in Achilles' mind, we follow to do you a favor, you with the dog's eyes, to win you honor, or your honor, and Menelaus's from the Trojans, that is, to get back what was stolen from you. You forget all of this, or else you care nothing. And now my prize you threaten in person to strip from me, he goes on, saying, why are you taking Briseis from me? He also goes on to say, I'm Achilles, I win all these battles, but I get a small share of the prize, whereas you, Agamemnon, as the king of all, take it all. So what's going on here? What is the strife? Well, we can see a lot of it kind of clearly. It's that Agamemnon is really shameless about this. He's expecting so much from his soldiers, while he himself isn't really willing to put in much of the work, and is willing to take things at any time willy-nilly. This is bad leadership on the part of Agamemnon, and Achilles isn't afraid to call him out on it. It's, however, after Agamemnon takes his prize from Achilles that Achilles gets a little mopey and says, you know what, I'm going home, or I'm at least not going to fight because this is stupid, I'm not getting anything out of this. It wasn't what I signed up for. So, moving on, we kind of can skip over Book 2. Interesting things happen with a figure named Thersites there, but we're going to move on so we can get in under time. I want to look at some things that just happened broadly in Book 3. First, there's a man-to-man fight between Menelaus and Paris, the two husbands of Helen. And you might be wonder, why didn't this happen earlier? This is the 9th year of the war. Both armies have lined up, as presumably they have for every summer for the last 8.5 years, and now they say, oh wait, why are we fighting like this? Why don't we just have the two men duke it out, and then the winner take all. The winner gets Helen, and that's just going to be it. That'll finish it. This is so sensible, and this is so... why did it take 9 years for them to come up with this very simple, very, human effective plan? Well, there's a couple of reasons. As you'll know, since you've read it, Paris, when he's about to get taken out, gets sequestered away by Aphrodite. She comes in, grabs him, and whisks him off back to Troy. So in a way, there's kind of a divine opposition to this easy fix. And again, if we're thinking that Zeus's will in this whole thing was to unburden Earth of population, of course, this would not accomplish his main objective of reducing the population. But what it does also suggest is that this war, this 10-year war, already was going on. People know the myth, and people probably asked, well, Homer, you know about the Trojan War, why didn't they just have this fight? Well, this is a nice way to capture this kind of fight that people want to see happen. They want to see these two big men duke it out, especially because Menelaus is Greek and he's a bit stronger than Paris, who's always portrayed as being a bit weak, and then Paris is mainly an archer. That's how he gets Achilles in the end, and that's not seen as a very manly way to fight. So this is a good way. You can tell that this story, Menelaus fighting Paris man-to-man, is introduced into the myth much later. There was a war that was just epic and kept on going on, and then people reasonably thought, well, why wasn't there just a mano-a-mano fight? Why wasn't there Menelaus versus Paris? Well, this is a way of Homer introducing this into the Iliad, and also, as we've seen with that telescoping of narrative, he's able to take this back 9 years to the initial cause between Menelaus and Paris both fighting over Helen. So on the one hand, this is so silly. On the other hand, it really is effective storytelling to bring out something that people want to see early on, and this is a way that Homer could begin in the middle of things, but then zoom back and talk about some of the causes behind the whole war. And then later in Book 3, or kind of as this is going on, Helen is brought out to the walls of Troy, and she gives a description of the Greek leaders. This is another good way of, saying, who are these people? What do they look like? In the epic storytelling itself, there's not really much cause to bring this up. You're just talking about the name of a man and what he does. This is a way of introducing you to the characters, giving a little bit of physical appearance, and then also some backstory. Why wouldn't this description of the Greek leaders have happened earlier? Why is it only 9 years into the war that these things happen? Again, this is Homer's use of starting at the beginning with an initial conflict, and now can move, as he's moving forward in the narrative, technically, he's actually constantly looking back into the earlier causes of the war. So much for that part of Book 3. I want to continue on with this aspect of Helen with the Greek, actually with the Trojan elders on the walls, as she's about to describe these Greek leaders. So this is a famous scene in many kind of traditions. It's called the taikoscopy, which is the kind of view from the wall in Greek is what it means. But as Helen appears, the Trojan elders have this to say. So here Homer is kind of giving it the narrative. So now through old age these fought no longer. We're explaining why there are men that are not in the battlefield, yet they were excellent speakers still. And this is a kind of constant theme in early Greek literature and thought, that it's a young man's place to fight, it's an older man's place to deliberate and speak. And clear, so they're excellent speakers and they speak clear, as cicadas who through the forest settle on trees to issue their delicate voice of singing. A nice epic simile here. And cicada is also significant. There's a myth of Tithonus. We'll get to this at some point later, and there's a great Alfred Lord Tennyson poem about it, which starts, "The woods decay and fall." It's a great poem. I encourage you to Google it and find it. But Tithonus was a Trojan who fell in love and married the goddess Aurora, or the dawn, or Eos in Greek. But then she doesn't age, and he is granted immortality, but keeps shrinking with old age until he turns into a cicada. A really good story of metamorphosis. So we'll see this in Ovid. But this cicada is being attached to an elder speaker, and this kind of evocative Trojan story behind it is all here for those listeners to Homer who know it. So such were they, the old men who sat on the tower, chief men of the Trojans. And these, as they saw Helen along the tower approaching, murmuring softly to each other, uttered their winged words. This is a classic way of ending a line in the Homeric poetry, winged words. So, and they say, "Surely there's no blame on Trojans and strong grieved Achaeans," that's Achaeans with good shin guards, "if for a long time they suffer hardship for a woman like this one. Terrible is the likeness of her face to the immortal goddesses, still, though she be such, that is so beautiful, and potentially worth fighting over, let her go away to the ships," that is, the Greek ships, "go home, lest she be left behind here, a grief to us and our children." So we're constantly talking about what caused this war, why are people here, why are we fighting, and then we get a kind of ambivalent answer from these Trojan elders. They say there's no blame for fighting for her because she's hot like a goddess. And again, we see the beauty aspect of the beauty competition, beautiful Paris, beautiful Helen. This beauty just proliferates in the face of the war, but still they think overall she's worse to have than not to have, and we should let her go. And if we see this kind of combination of beauty with grief and sufferings, we're very much in that misogynistic tone that we saw with Hesiod, and especially the myth of Pandora. In many ways, Helen is now a kind of Pandora within this mythic story. She's not opening any boxes, but her very presence is ruinous to both sides of the war. So I'm going to wrap that up there. I'll post the assignment in text on Canvas, but I won't include it in the lecture. Hope you're all doing great. Stay healthy, and I'll see you hopefully on Wednesday or Thursday. Until then, take care.